Hello and welcome back to the Polarity podcast, the show where an RTD fanboy and an RTD critic discuss the Russell T Davies era of Doctor Who. My name is Lewis.
And I'm Gav.
And we've reached the end of Series 1 of the podcast already. It has gone super quick. But we really hope you've enjoyed kind of revisiting Series 1 with us both over the last...
What a pleasure.
There you go. It's been great fun over the last 10-11 weeks. Putting this podcast together and hearing from you guys, it's been a really gratifying experience, and we're looking forward to the future. But before we finish the podcast for a little bit, we're going to go on a bit of a break after this, but before then, we're just going to round up the series as a whole, round up Series 1, wax lyrical about what we thought of it before and what we think of it now after having done the podcast, and just look at the whole kind of experience as a whole and how that's kind of impacted our views on the series. So... yeah. So, Gav, to kick us off, where are you at with Series 1 now versus where you were at before starting the podcast? Kind of how have things changed for you, and what's kind of stayed the same? And yeah,
I think previously I probably felt that this series was kind of inoffensive. I didn't really go back and watch it. It wasn't my cup of tea. Nowadays, I think I've got appreciation for some of the ideas. Having done this podcast, done this, I've got a lot more appreciation for it. I think the main thing I've come away from is a great appreciation for Christopher Eccleston in particular as an actor, and all of that kind of, that aspect of him and him within the show. So it's overall, I'd say I've had a more kind of positive view of it. I did notice that there were some things I actually liked less on rewatch and stuff like that. But overall, it's been quite a positive experience for me. I don't know how it's been for you.
It's been nice. It's good to hear that. I mean, especially with the Chris Eccleston thing, it's been nice kind of seeing, because I saw you posted like tier rankings of the Doctors on Twitter, and it was nice to see him so high up. After knowing you for so many years and knowing kind of your thoughts on the new series in general, and kind of lumping Chris in with that sometimes, it's been nice to kind of see your appreciation for 9. Go up over doing these episodes, and I mean that is a big thing. I think a lot of people may have noticed, and we've pointed it out a few times throughout Series 1. This is called the Polarity podcast. It's supposed to be two people with very different opinions, but we've kind of been on the same wavelength for a lot of this. It's really only been Dalek and the finale that we've kind of vehemently disagreed on, I think.
Yeah.
Which won't stay that way for long, but I think it's interesting that kind of that has gone that way. I mean, for me, my opinion's not really changed. I've always loved Series 1, and kind of talking through it for this podcast really hasn't changed any of that. It's not really it's as good as it ever has been for me. Talking through certain stories really made me just remember and just go, oh yeah, so good, isn't it? So yeah, mine is very generic kind of opinion, and I guess pretty predictable if you know me, but I don't, but it's just kind of, it's pretty much stayed the same.
I'd have hoped I'd have converted you to misery by now, but oh well.
Well, I managed to somewhat bring you around on a lot of aspects, so yeah. I think it's kind of, I think we've done our fair share. We've filled our roles well, and it's going to be interesting kind of going into Series 2, with both of our feelings on that series being quite interesting, I think. It's going to be an interesting kind of journey through that, and to see how kind of different the tone of that is to this series of the podcast. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how that changes overall, I think.
Yeah, I think it gets really interesting from this point onwards, because I think, the Tennant era is always the one that I've had big issues with. But the thing is with that is that was a long time ago now. I'm of the opinion that if you don't like something, generally you shouldn't kind of just watch it because you don't like it. That being said, sometimes it's good to just revisit these things. And if I've learnt anything rather from Series 1, it's, sometimes these things aren't as bad as you remember. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. And I feel like as a sane-ish human being who kind of gets to watch these things for the sake of a good podcast that I just enjoy doing, I hope that I'll come away from series 2 with a more positive opinion. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see. But I am trying to be optimistic. And it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Well, I mean, yeah, you never know. You never know. It's all fair game at this point. It's fair game. So just sticking with series 1 for the moment, then. I think your answer to this question is going to be quite obvious. In fact, to the next 2 questions, it is going to be quite obvious. Favorite episode of the series?
Father's Day. No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
I think that's pretty obvious, isn't it? Yeah. Judging from that episode. That episode was extremely positive on all fronts from me and you.
I don't think we could have ever been so glowingly in line with each other with Father's Day.
Yeah. And we mentioned it at the time, that might be the only time that does happen in this whole podcast.
I can think of another, but we'll get to it when we do.
I know exactly the other that you're talking about, but even then I still think I'm probably going to be a bit more positive. But I don't know, we'll have to see.
I don't know anyone who won't be able to guess that, actually. If you know what we're talking about, drop a comment. I'm sure you know. Let us know wherever you're listening. Because
it will be obvious.
It should be really bloody obvious, but I'd be surprised if someone gets that wrong. But please feel free to get it wrong and surprise us.
Yeah. Least favourite episode. Again, I'm pretty sure it's going to be obvious, but...
Well, Parting of the Ways, I suppose, yeah. That's where I am with it, yeah.
Well, it was the lowest score you gave. You
gave
that 1.5, I think,
but
so...
Weirdly, I'm thinking about it, kind of having had a bit of separation. When we recorded that episode, I've just finished watching it. I don't know if I'd change the score objectively, but I think that the ideas of it... sometimes you have a different kind of critical opinion to kind of like just a general watching opinion.
Yeah.
I think I'd probably rather watch Parting of the Ways because it's got that 1.5 worth of good scenes than maybe watching The Unquiet Dead again, even though it's a 6.5 thing, because The Unquiet Dead is less exciting, and those 6 points are good, but they don't come. I don't think they're as kind of interesting. Maybe Parting of the Ways is a more interesting episode, and
I can see that.
And I feel like it's one of those episodes when I watched it, and again last week. I mean, I was so kind of vehement about it, but it honestly, I wonder if one day I'll come around to that episode, because so much of our discussion there was very morally based, and morals, they're tricky things. They change. So
it got very kind of deep at one point, about halfway through, which it was quite amusing when I was editing that, because I began to forget that we were talking about Doctor Who for a minute, which was it was kind of funny. But
this was an interesting point in the podcast, actually, because I had a few people who have listened to the podcast kind of talk to me about this episode, about the Parting of the Ways episode. And what seems to be the general consensus so far is that actually they quite liked us bickering about philosophy. So there you go. But these are people I know in person, and obviously that's a bit different. But yeah,
I get that vibe too, to be honest. I mean, if you like us bickering, there's more of that to come.
There is. But again, these are things we'll be interested in knowing, is what you liked and what you didn't like as well. Because I mean, that's part of what we do it for, is for an audience, isn't it?
Well, I mean, because my prevailing thought throughout a lot of series 1 of just this podcast, like just doing the podcast, was we're very much, because we're on similar-ish pages on this series, I feel like we've only really begun to show to kind of live up to the premise, really. Not that I want conflict, and not that I want it to be that kind of divided, but I just think it's gonna be different going forward, I think, just given how the show changes from this point.
I think get ready for a different vibe for the Series 2 podcast, because certainly the way this has gone is very It's been a really relaxed and kind of in
It's been
tune
chill.
thing, and I think we'll still be relaxed. You know what I mean? I don't have the
Oh yeah,
energy to get vexed over a family science fiction program, but I
yeah,
do. You know, but I think in terms of opinions, it'll probably be more heated.
probably,
Probably.
yeah. So yeah, my favorite episode of the series is Parting of the Waves. It's yeah,
Yes.
it's no, again no surprise there. My least favorite, Long Game, and
That
my
makes sense. That
least
lines up with your
yeah.
score.
It doesn't look with my score, and I do want to again stress that I don't dislike that. It's just out of all of them, it's the one where I'm like, yeah, I could probably skip that if I had to skip any of them.
Yeah.
That's just the. It's surrounded by so much good, in my opinion, and it just kind of gets buried. But it's still an interesting story with some interesting ideas, and I think that podcast was quite interesting because, um, we, I mean, you loved that, and I was really
I thought it was
surprised.
great.
I really thought we were going to go into that episode, um, and we were kind of going to be both on the same level, but you were really kind of happy with that, which was quite nice to hear. Even if it's my least favorite.
That'll be an interesting thing. That really surprised me. I think that'll be an interesting thing going forward to see if that happens again.
Yeah,
That's one of those
I'm.
super rare times on in terms of the score and in terms of actual general opinion where I've scored it better than you have. I
Yeah,
think that literally only happens twice. That only happened twice this series, yeah. Which is really weird. That was a big shock, I
yeah.
think.
What were those two? So it was obviously the Long Game, and
It
what was
was
the
the
other
long
one?
game and it was also Boomtown, which I gave just point
Oh
0.5
yeah,
more than you. It's a
that
very,
makes
very
sense.
slight difference.
Oh, and again, Boomtown was pretty interesting because that was again one I really thought you were going to hate that because of just it's a very RTD episode, and it's full of his tendencies and it's full of his tropes. So I really thought that was kind of going to be one that you wouldn't like, which yeah, it was a nice surprise when you said, "Oh, it's really good." I was like, "Oh shit, okay, fair enough." Um,
This is
yeah,
what I found, like thinking about it, is that when you look at kind of my preferences towards this series, and I won't speak for you, but for me personally, I think what's interesting is actually it seems to be the episodes with the biggest stakes are the ones I'm not particularly bothered about, and
that is a pattern. Yeah,
that probably speaks to me not being a fan of series arcs. I think most people know I'm a classic fanboy through and through. And classic who does do arcs sometimes, but I mean usually character arcs, the development of the individual in a kind of background sort of way. Maybe some writers are quietly agreeing on doing something, but there's never kind of an explicit thing running through.
no,
Whereas this is something that the new series picks up on because it's more in line with modern formulas of television, or at the time that modern, I'd say character arcs are still very modern, still in. Um, but it's not something I'm particularly interested in. Is the big series arc? What's going to happen at the end? It's just not something that's ever appealed to me,
yeah,
and I think it shows through my scores. So that the big grand episodes don't do well for me, but the ones that are smaller and more low key do really, really well.
yeah. And again, I think that's going to be interesting to see how that changes because, series two kind of presents us with some really kind of small episodes. I mean, one in particular is one of my very favourites that isn't very popular. That I'm really interested to get to that one.
What, Love and Monsters?
I
Oh,
mean,
can I
yeah.
say it? Oh,
I
don't,
mean,
cut out. Don't let anyone know.
yeah.
Don't let anyone know.
I mean, I'm pretty sure it's obvious, but I wasn't going to kind of get to it. But like, yeah, we might as well. I mean that podcast is going to be interesting. First of all, because it's one of my very favourites, but also just to see how you kind of react to that in relation to what you've spoken about here, I guess.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I suppose that's something we've got to bear in mind when we approach it. Will I kind of contradict myself? Because that's very possible, I think one of the things doing a series or reviewing something like this, where it's relatively long form viewing, is that you do find that your opinions contradict yourself. You might say, oh, I like this brand of episode, this type of episode, and then you sort of find another one, you go, actually, I didn't like that. It's very interesting, and it's I a minute ago, obviously I was talking about, maybe there's a trend in my viewing preference. But equally, maybe that's not true. Maybe that's just the first series assumption. So these things are very interesting. I think these are things that kind of stand out to me looking at this
Yeah,
series overview and how that might affect things going forward.
Yeah, you never know. And I mean, one thing I think we both agree on with series one is that it's very much it's of its time.
Yeah,
It's the most 2000s, I guess, any of these series are. I mean, because they all are, but I just think yeah. I think series one is the most. It's so 2005.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and that's I think that's coming away from it when you analyze this series. It's a lot of it is kind of coming at it from the perspective of the time, which is very much like, again, before going into this, I know that you kind of took issue with the lack of callback, the lack of kind of carryover from Classic Who, the format and
yeah,
everything. And I think it's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's been a bit of kind of peace. You've kind of got to grips with that a bit more, just discussing
yeah.
it and approaching it from this is just how TV was in 2005 and kind of thing.
That's right. Yeah, I think um, it's obviously this is just a feature of growing up. You know, as much as
Oh
I'm an
yeah,
adult now, I'm only 20, and you know, when I watched this series, I was tiny, tiny, tiny. Um, and a lot of this, you know, I was just kind of angry at the time for kid reasons, you know. And sometimes I think you think back to that time, you think, oh, that pissed me off back then, so it's just annoys me now, you know. But you have to kind of take a bit of, you know, have a think about it, you know. How much do I seriously care? When you know, when it comes to Classic Who carryover and stuff like that, if I like Classic Who that much, it's still there. It's not been taken from me. Sure, maybe I don't know. Russell T Davies isn't into talking about Classic Who. Maybe he doesn't want it the way it was. That's fine because it's always there for me. I can always
yeah,
go back to it, and there's like so much. You know, I'm a big fan of expanded media, and I highly recommend to anyone who. I don't think there are that many people out there who share my sentiments in terms of Doctor Who, but if you are, one, high five. Two, if you haven't done expanded media yet, go for it because honestly, you know, there's so much you will never finish all of that in your lifetime, and it's just I think it's when you start thinking about it like that, you think, you know, is it worth being vexed over the fact that this doesn't have a lot of classic, you know, a classic
yeah.
feel to it? Not really. Just view it as television, and I just think that's a good
View it
thing.
as what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is, and I think for what it is, it's been pretty decent, you know.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of what I've been trying to, kind of maybe make you understand. Not make you understand. You kind of get where I'm coming from. It's maybe that I've been trying to say to you for a few years now. You know, this is just how TV was in 2005.
Yeah,
This is just how things were. It's a response to the public's perception of Doctor Who. You know, and it's, yeah, I don't know. It's been interesting to see you kind of respond to that.
yeah,
In a way, it's been nice, and it's, you know, Russell T Davies has said he does regret not embracing the past more, but it was just kind of the culture of the time, the culture of the BBC, and the culture of the way Doctor Who was perceived. He kind of avoided it as much as possible, but he has said he regrets it. Like, he always wanted to do a Fendel story, Image of the Fendel sequel.
Shooty Gatwa against the Fendal anymore.
Well, there you go. He said it a few years ago. He said that's probably his biggest regret from his time. He never did like a full on sequel to a classic story. Obviously we have Gridlock and the Macro, but that's more of a cameo, more of just there in it. It's not a sequel to the Macro Terror. So I don't know. I just find that interesting. It's very much everything in the series is of its time.
That's true.
And certain decisions wouldn't be repeated now, and you know that's fine, and they shouldn't.
No.
So yeah, I find that very interesting, and that kind of how what we've been talking about. I hope it's kind of been interesting discussion from that, if that makes sense.
I think so. One of the questions I have is, do you think kind of my perspective has influenced, not changed your opinion of the series, but do you think it's had any sort of influence for you?
It's definitely like
Or offered
I
anything, probably is a better term.
no, yeah, for sure. Like I absolutely see where you're coming from with a lot of things, even if I don't agree, kind of thing. And it's been nice, kind of getting your in-depth perspective about that. I definitely, it hasn't altered my opinion in such that I now think of something worse than I did before, if that makes sense. But
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's definitely offered food for thought. Um, and I think that's really a benefit of this podcast, is just having that kind of food for thought, and just, oh yeah, maybe that's not so good, or maybe that's actually better than I thought. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
I just think what's important with kind of my opinion, when I'm sat here in a podcast doing the negative side, I think it's important to say that, like, in all seriousness, I don't want to bring anyone's perception of the
No,
episodes
no, no,
down.
no.
Um,
And likewise, I'm not
and I
trying to
think,
like say everything was
yeah,
perfect, and you should, if you don't think this is perfect, you're mad or something, like, you know.
and I sincerely hope that, you know, if you're listening and you love this, and I say something bad, I hope that doesn't spoil it for you.
No.
But equally, I hope maybe I can give you an insight. You know, maybe part of my goal of talking about things my way is, one, to remind, because I think sometimes this happens with fandom in the modern day, and, you know, this sort of thing. Oftentimes, if something is generally highly regarded, I think everyone just sort of clusters around that high regard and
Yeah.
doesn't give it a second look. Um, and what I'm perhaps suggesting by popping my opinion into this sort of space is to say, maybe you think it's amazing, and maybe it is amazing, but could this have been better? Could it have been even better with this? You know,
Yeah.
or is this a great chance to look at it and say, hey, maybe, you know, for the creatives out there, maybe this is a great way to change it creatively. You know, I'm hoping I give that sort of idea out there, and I think that's been a real joy of this podcast, is that it's not been. I hope it hasn't come across that way either. It's not been
No, no.
negativity for the sake of negativity. It's been a chance to share insights, and in the same way as, you know, for me, talking to you about, you know, you being positive about episodes doesn't feel like, you know, toxic positivity or some sort of forcing an opinion on me. It's been a really interesting insight to say, hey, hang on, do you think there's a way to appreciate it, you know,
Yeah.
that you may have not had a look at before, or is it worth considering that it could have this? So it's a really interesting way of, I think one thing I've really enjoyed about doing this first series, and just the podcast in general, it's offered a really interesting insight into how we approach positivity and negativity with regards to our opinions, which I just think is really interesting.
And I think everything is very black and white on the internet and fandom as
Oh
well.
yes, oh yeah,
I don't know. I really hate like, I see it all the time on Twitter. Something comes out, let's say like new Marvel film, whatever, and the first reply to any tweet about it is just the word mid, and like people refuse to elaborate. And I'm not saying like get into this big essay or discussion about it, but I just think it just boils down like so much interesting discussion and nuanced critique of something to just mid.
yeah.
And I just see it all the time, and it just gets on my nerves. Like, and somebody will reply saying, "Oh, maybe you've considered this," and they're like, "Yeah, but mid though." I'm like, "Well, it's not. It's not. It's not a criticism. You're just saying words. You're just saying a word."
Well, this is the thing. I feel like, so. If any of you follow me on Twitter, which you should, you know, I've found it quite entertaining recently to sort of. I'm a big fan of branding my social media in ways that isn't necessarily true to me, just because I find it entertaining and more kind of artistically fulfilling, if you want. And one of the things I've really liked doing at the moment is mocking that sort of thing. But you realise when you create that, when you parody it, is that you really aren't giving yourself any opportunity to voice any actual discussion. So I'll put an opinion out there. I'll post a tier list, for instance, and I won't really talk about it. Um, and it's like, yeah, okay. On one hand, I'm playing a character and it's funny, but
Yeah.
on the other hand, it's like it does make you realize how locked off Twitter is, and online discussion in general.
Oh
It's
God, yeah.
locked off from that discussion, which I think is a shame. I think this is where a podcast is really good, because you are discussing, aren't you? You're kind
Yeah.
of talking about this stuff, and I just think that's really cool.
I think it's important to, and it's often something isn't as black and white as good or bad.
Yeah,
Especially when you're talking about art, which is so subjective and so kind of, I guess, trivial in the grand scheme of things. But ultimately, it's art is important,
yeah,
and I think it just boiling all that down to good, bad, or mid is just
oh yeah,
is it doesn't do anyone any favors, I think. And I'm not saying like nobody can say, oh yeah, that was good or that was bad or whatever. I'm just saying that I just think there are deeper discussions to be had. If you get where I'm coming from. And I'm aware that like Twitter has character limits and all that. I just think it's often not as simple as it's boiled down to or anything.
I think to me maybe there's just a culture that needs to happen for this sort of discourse, especially bearing in mind we're talking about a TV show.
Gotcha.
There needs to be an approach to this kind of culture that actually, like, it's actually difficult to communicate online. Like, it's not. It's instant, and I think people are drawn to that instantaneous idea. We as Doctor Who fans can all collect around, a thread, for instance. But,
yeah.
How easy is it for us to actually vocalize? As human beings, we rely on emotions and body language and all these various things, and you can't convey that online.
No.
And people, and when you're online, you're anonymous, and you have all these differences that makes it this entirely different thing. But we don't associate online discourse as a separate thing. We make it the same thing as general discourse. And so we get a lot of emotions involved in it. And it just becomes fiery tweet replies, for instance, that are just one-word answers to one another using kind of the new wave of playground insults to hopefully win across a few Twitter likes and prove that you have kind of, ratioed the other person or whatever it is. And it's like, well, what is that proving in the way of discussing and sharing opinions? I don't think it's proving much at all.
I mean, 90% of Twitter arguments would not happen in real life if both parties could see the tone of what somebody's saying. Because the amount of times people just say something on Twitter and it's perfectly innocent and it's a perfectly innocent tone, they say, oh yeah, that wasn't for me or whatever. But because maybe just the way they've written it and the way they've just used punctuation or whatever, it looks aggressive even when it really isn't. And it starts arguments and it starts drama, and I don't think that drama would be there in real life if people could see, and hear the tone, the real tone of it and where it's actually coming from.
Absolutely. No, I think I agree with you, and it's just it's an interesting thing, and again, this is a great aim of this podcast, I suppose. This is kind of why we started it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in it for the money, personally, the thousands of pounds we get every episode. But Lewis is definitely in it for promoting that idea.
The passion.
So it's for the passion of sort of discourse without this sort of silliness, which I think this is a great thing about this first series that I've found is it's been sensible discourse.
For real. So just getting into the latter stages of this little wrap-up then, I believe you have some statistics for us. We're getting very scientific now.
We are.
So please regale us with data that you've collected.
So I have sat down and listened to the endings of every single podcast. I'm not egotistical enough to listen to every single one fully. But I looked at the scores, and a couple interesting things went up. The first thing I want to say is that in episode 9 of the podcast, which was Boomtown, we said that I liked Boomtown as much as The Long Game, so I'd give it the same score of 8.5. This is not true. The Long Game, I gave a 7.5. So I actually gave Boomtown a higher score.
Exposed.
So the first thing I want to say is that I think that is still a valid score, because I do think, having had time to mull on it and look at these scores, I do think Boomtown is probably better than The Long Game.
Okay.
Now, getting into the actual data. So, hopefully you've listened to the episodes, so you kind of know where we are. You know what the scores were, roughly. So I'm not going to go through each...
beyond the scores.
So I'm not going to give each score. Look, I'm not going to read them all out in a big list, because it will just be me saying numbers for a minute or so, and it's boring. So, what I'm going to say is that I crunched the numbers, and to hopefully I put this all in the calculator correctly, but I've given Series 1 an average score of 6 out of 10, and Lewis gave Series 1 an average score of 8.1 out of 10. There's one more thing I want to talk about, and that's something we didn't talk about before we recorded. And that's that actually the trend of data is quite similar. So our scores went up and down roughly the same. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this, which is Dalek and the Parting of the Ways, where obviously they were very, very distant. And with The Empty Child, I gave it a 6, whereas Lewis gave it a 9. And, it shows that Lewis had a consistently upwards kind of view at that point, whereas mine kind of dips a bit more. But overall, the pattern of Series 1 and our opinions are actually quite similar. Mine's just a little lower scores the whole way through, but it's a similar pattern of change.
Which is interesting, I think.
What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I think it speaks to, like you say, I think we perceive the series very similarly. It's just our opinions of the actual stories vary. But I think both of us agree that the start is very varied, and then it takes a bit of a dark turn after Dalek, and the tone changes. I think, to boil it down to basic stuff like that, I think we both agree there, right? Like, we both agree the evolution of the series, and how we mentioned how confident it gets, and the confidence kind of grows over the 13 episodes.
Yep.
So I do find it interesting that we do have a very similar perception, even if our opinions on the stories do differ.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And I think yeah, go on.
No, sorry, you go.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think it'll be interesting when we get to our Series 2 wrap-up, like when we finished Series 2 and we wrap that up in a similar style to this. I think it'll be interesting to compare, and likewise with 3 and 4 and the specials. I think it'd be interesting to compare that average as it goes.
And I think they're really great reflective scores as well, given that I gave Series 1 a 6 and you gave it an 8. I think the average has worked out really well, because I would say that I think you'll agree that's pretty reflective of our opinions of these series.
Oh, that's pretty much what I thought I was gonna give it. Yeah. I mean, I think the 0.1 makes all the difference on my end.
plenty of difference.
But yeah, that's pretty much what I would have predicted, I would think. So I don't know. It's interesting, and I think just closing off the Series 1 chat, it's been a pleasant experience for both of us, I think.
Yeah,
overall.
I think so.
Just in terms of how our opinions have evolved from the episodes, and even if mine hasn't evolved that much, but you know what I mean.
I think mine's basically been as I expected it, in a weird way, because although I think a lot of this has just been me being reminded of the episodes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yours has been more positive than I thought, just from my perspective.
For now.
Yeah.
No, it has been. Yeah, I've been surprised with my own positivity on it, actually, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay, just to wrap this up then, just to look forward to Series 2, what are your expectations going into it? We've spoken a little about it already, but what are you kind of looking forward to getting stuck into as we go into the next series?
I think probably School Reunion is going to be an interesting one. That's one that's come to mind, simply because obviously that has classic elements in it.
I feel like that would be interesting.
That would be interesting. I think I'd be interested to talk about the Cybermen two-parter, because I've got some interesting thoughts on that.
Oh yes, do we think that'll be another Dalek?
We'll see. And the finale, I think, will be interesting to talk about. I don't really remember too much of the rest. Obviously, there'll be episodes like Love and Monsters. Fear Her, right? That's Series 2, yeah, it is. That'll be an interesting one to talk about. Things like that, I think, yeah. Yeah, so I think it'll overall be quite interesting.
Well, I think going into it, I think Girl in the Fireplace will be interesting for
that's a shout.
Quite a few reasons. I think pretty much the other ones you've mentioned as well. I think with Series 2, just my thoughts going into it, kind of before we dive into the discussions of the episode when you see us next, my current thought going into it is that it is my least favourite of the RTD era. Of the kind of 4 series and the specials, it's my least favourite of the bunch. So I'm interested to see kind of what you think of it versus what I think of it, because there's a lot of my favourites in there. There's a lot of ones I'm not so fond of as well. So it's going to be another interesting series, and I'm really looking forward to kind of getting into it with you as we explore David Tennant's first run. But on the similar level, then, just going into it, what are your kind of thoughts initially, just basic thoughts?
I think for me, Series 2 is not it's not my least favourite. I don't think.
Surprising.
I think I know what my least favorite is, but we will see. We will see. You know, you'll never know. We might come to the scores by the time we're finished and say, well, actually.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think. Yeah, I was never a big fan of it. I don't think I never thought it was any sort of series one. I mean, I don't think series one. I thought series one was all right, but I never really remember enjoying series two particularly. And as a lot of people would probably know, the 10th Doctor is one of, if not my least favorite Doctor. I'd say tied with the 11th. So it's just, yeah, it'd be interesting to go down right to my kind of bottom tier of Doctors. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very nostalgic series for me, but it's got some. The reason it's my least favorite is not because I hate it or anything, but I just think the reason it's my least favorite is because of some things that I think will be very interesting to discuss that I won't say now, but I think as we get into the early episodes, will kind of become apparent, and I think we'll kind of discuss it and break down why I think it's probably the weakest of the four, even though I still, enjoy it a lot. But I think it will be an interesting discussion, so I'm really looking forward to getting into it with you.
Yeah, for sure.
Shall we wrap it up there?
I think so.
So thank you for joining us for Series 1 of the Polarity podcast. We've finished the first series of the show, and we're going to take a little break now.
Yeah.
For an undisclosed amount of time. We haven't quite decided yet, but you'll be seeing us again before the end of the year. That's for certain.
Yeah.
But we're going to take a month or two off just to kind of recalibrate and refresh and just take a little breather. And when we come back, we'll have some exciting new changes to the show. We're going to change things up a bit, improve some things, kind of learn from what we've done on this first series, and I think it's going to be a real kind of special thing and a real kind of leap in quality. Hopefully, anyway, we're always trying to make this show better. And so if you have any feedback for what we can improve as we go into Series 2 that we can kind of implement, then please let us know. We will be launching our YouTube channel, Polarity Podcast YouTube channel, so look forward to that in the coming weeks and months. But if you really miss us, dear listener, if you really miss our thoughts every Wednesday, you can go back and re-listen to all 11 episodes of Series 1 of the Polarity Podcast on YouTube, The Gargantuan Apple, and on Spotify under Doctor Who, The Polarity Podcast. They're all there. Go and re-listen.
Enjoy yourself. You might have missed something the first time. Maybe you, I don't know, had to go away from your phone for a few minutes to make a cup of tea and the kettle was too loud.
Exactly.
If you missed something.
Exactly.
Maybe me or Lewis said something really, really mind-blowing for those few seconds.
Exactly. There's plenty to keep you busy while you wait for us to make our grand return. And hey, why not give us a follow on social media, on Twitter and on Instagram, and our own personal Instagrams and Twitters, if you would like to interact with us more and engage with us more over on those platforms. We've kind of slagged off Twitter discourse over this little wrap up.
Well, I'll gladly bully you on Twitter if you'd like. So,
and I'll gladly get into some nice discussions with you over there. So thank you so much for the support over this series of the podcast. We really hope you enjoy. So yeah, we really hope you enjoy what we've got planned for Series 2. And we'll see you when we see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.